Chapter 6, The Republican Experiment. After the Revolution, Americans tried to construct practicing governments based on Republican principles. Defining a Republican culture. In the 1780s, many Americans feared their revolution could still fail if not grounded in a virtuous Republican government, but ordinary folk, influenced by evangelicalism, expected God-given progress found on goodness and not wealth. They expected the revolution to bring them greater liberty, a voice in government, and an end to special privilege. Others, fearing liberty led to democratic excesses, emphasized the need for order. Sorting out these conflicts generated political debate for a generation. Living in the shadow of the revolution. Although less wrenching than the great social upheavals of modern times, the revolution caused Americans to reevaluate accepted social hierarchies and consider the role of equality in their society. Social and political reform. Fearful of privilege, Republicans insisted on the appearance of equality and some social and political reforms. They abolished remnants of aristocratic privileges like entail and primogeniture, changed electoral patterns in part by lowering property requirements, and moved towards separation of church and state. African Americans in the new republic. Some Republicans noted the contradiction between their ideals of virtue and the evils of slavery, and many African Americans issued claims for equality based on that glaring inconsistency and the achievements of their people, including, for example, Benjamin Banneker and Phyllis Wheatley. Northerners attacked and abolished the institution, but refused to accept freedmen as their equals. Though many Southern Republicans questioned the morality of slavery and some freed their slaves as a result, the economic incentives of slave ownership proved too powerful in the South. The challenge of women's rights. By the 1770s, few Americans espoused the previous accepted views of unlimited power for patriarchs. Some women began to demand more of their husbands and society, and to claim special responsibility for nurturing in their children the virtues essential to a Republican government. Although women made some gains in education and law, society still defined them exclusively as homemakers, wives, and mothers. Postponing full liberty. Republicans in the era made few concrete achievements, but established ideals of assumption that would influence later generations. The states' experiments in republicanism. After the Colonial Declaration of Independence in 1776, Americans wrote new state constitutions that were often provincial and sometimes experimental. These documents vividly revealed their social and regional differences. Blueprints for state government. The new state constitutions reflected certain political assumptions shared by most Americans, including an insistence on written documents emerging from their distrust of power. Natural rights and state constitutions. The new state constitutions tended to emphasize fundamental freedoms, especially those of religion, speech, and press, and to grant great power to legislatures and little to governors. Several states did away with the office altogether. Power to the people. Massachusetts set an important precedent by drafting its constitution in a special convention called for that purpose. Though the success of the state governments in representing the will of the people remained to be seen, in all states more of the people's men appeared in governmental offices. Stumbling towards new national government. During the military crisis of the Revolution, the Second Continental Congress assumed national authority, but independence would necessarily result in the creation of a greater central authority to conduct the war, borrow money, regulate trade, and negotiate treaties. Articles of Confederation. Americans created a weak national Congress because they trusted state power more than they trusted central power. Most felt only apathy and hostility towards their new government, which they saw as a powerless and irrelevant fact. Western lands key to the first Constitution. The major point of dispute for the new government was the ownership of Western lands. Some of the older states claimed them under the auspice of their royal charters, while other states felt such territories should be shared by all Americans, with ownership granted to the new Confederation of Governments. Northwest Ordinance, the Confederation's major achievement. The new national government eventually acquired these lands and provided for their orderly survey, sale, and governance, preventing a chaotic condition of later settlement in the southwestern part of the new country, and providing the new government with an important source of revenue. Strengthening federal authority. Complaints about the Articles of Confederation abounded, most of them reflecting economic frustrations that emerged because recovery after the Revolution was slow. The nationalist critique. The national government lacked the power to do much of anything about several important national problems, including most notably the floundering economy and overwhelming national and state war debts. Such problems led to a group of nationalists led by Alexander Hamilton and James Madison to call for major constitutional reforms that began with the amendment to allow Congress to impose taxes on the nation in an effort to pay its debts. Diplomatic humiliation. In foreign affairs, too, the Confederation proved inadequate. The U.S. claimed land occupied by Spanish and the English, but the Congress did not have the power necessary to contest the Europeans' control over the lands. International affairs were not much better as congressional delegates met irregularly. States often failed to even send delegates, and the nation lacked a permanent capital. Have we fought for this? Most Americans still feared central power, but many prosperous Republicans had come to realize that change needed to occur if the nation were to survive. The genius of James Madison. Some Republicans feared that liberty had been taken too far, believing ordinary citizens who voted in open elections in many states lacked Republican virtue and threatened order. Moreover, the weaknesses of the Confederation threatened commercial prosperity. Only a strong central government, something that was believed to be antithetical to the Republic, could solve these problems. Madison provided these anxious Republicans with a theory to sustain their hope for a republic with a strong government. He argued that a large republic could prosper as a variety of interests would develop, check one another, and leave the government in the hands of able and virtuous men without undermining liberty. Constitutional reforms. The nationalist movement to revise the Articles of Confederation grew stronger because of fears aroused by Shays' Rebellion, culminating in a constitutional convention. The Philadelphia Convention. The 55 men who were to write the Constitution were mostly young, practical, and prominent nationalists. Inventing a federal republic. They based their work primarily on Madison's Virginia Plan, which called for a strong central government consisting of a supreme two-house legislature, an executive, and a judiciary. Compromise saves the Constitution. These delegates compromised, especially on the issue of representation and of counting slaves as population, but retained the essentials of the Virginia Plan. Compromising with slaves